Hello everyone. In the previous video, we saw how to create an inventory system, and in this video, we see how to display this inventory system into UI widgets. To do so, the first thing I'm going to need to do is to go into my inventory folder, and when I right click in the content browser, look for user interface and look for widget blueprints. In that case, I want to choose user widgets, and I call that WB for widget blueprint and inventory. I'm going to open this widget blueprint. This is where we'll display every item that is stored inside the inventory. I will look for a canvas into the palette, in this case canvas panel. I'm going to drag and drop this under WB inventory. I will also look for a text, which I will drag and drop into this canvas panel. And this text, I will rename that inventory title. And the text of its content would be changed from text block to inventory. Back into the palette, I will search for a vertical box. Now drag and drop this vertical box into the canvas panel. And inside this vertical box, this is where I'll display every item that is inside the inventory. It will be displayed vertically. And all of that, the inventory title, I'm going to move the title that I created a bit more on the right side. So it's still on the left side, but not in the corner. And same for the box. I will make it bigger and drag that right under the inventory. So inside this vertical box, as I just mentioned, I will put all of the different items and it will display all of those items. So instead of manually adding a text for every item and do that for all of them, what I'm going to do is go back into the content browser and create a new user interface. So right click, user interface, widget blueprint. I choose with a user widget here, WB, and I'm going to call that item slot. In this item slot, this is what I will use to refer to all the items and what I will use into my WB inventory. To keep it simple, I'm going to just look for a text. Actually, I'm going to look for canvas panel first. I'm going to drag it under the WB item slot, and then I'm going to look for text. Drag the first text under canvas panel, and drag a second one once again under canvas panel. The first text, I will change the variable name to being item name, and I will check the isVariable box here. This way, I make this text block a variable. For the second text, I'm going to name it item quantity to display the quantity of items we have, and this will also be a variable. So I'm going to move those two next to each other, just making sure they are aligned. Yes. And finally, for this whole widget, what I'm going to change is I want it to not be a fill screen here. By default, it is automatically set to fill screen. What I want is the size to be desired. This way, the size of this widget is only the size of the elements that it contains. In that case, only 2 text blocks. So I'm going to compile, save, go back into my widget blueprint inventory, and in my palette I can now look for an item slot, which will show me the WB item slot. I'm going to drag this into the vertical box, and the whole idea is that for every item we have, this vertical box will display all of them, and in a vertical way. And we can see we have the text blocks on the left and the right side that correspond to the name and the quantity. By default, they are just set as text block. But if I do that, I can create as many items as I want inside the widget designer. But this will not really translate into an actual video game, because when you're in a game, you pick up items, you remove items from the inventory. There's a lot of things that go, a lot of things that moves, a lot of changes, and we need to have a way to reflect that programmatically. So I'm just going to delete those 2 item slots. I don't need them. I'm gonna compile my inventory, save it. I'm gonna minimize the window because we'll come back to it at one point. So I've created this widget inventory, this user widget inventory, but I need a way to display it for the user to see. To do that, I'm going to go into the content, I'm going to look into the third person folder, and I'm going to go into the folder, the input folder, go into the actions, and in there I'm going to create a new action. So I'm going to right click into the content browser and look for input, in that case input action. I'm going to name that IA inventory, open it, and in the triggers of the action I'm going to add a new trigger. So I'm going to add an element, and I will choose pressed here. I'm going to save and close that. Now, back into the input folder, I will open the IMC default. And here we can see all the mappings that are inside the game. We have the jump, we have move, we have look, we also have an interact mapping for every time we interact with objects. Here I will add a new action. By default this action is set to none. I will look for IA inventory, the action we just created. Here we have the keyboard button. If I click on it and press I on my keyboard, this will automatically attribute this I key to the action. So what this means, what we've created here, is every time I press the I key, it triggers an action, which the main goal of this action is to show and display the inventory to the user. And if I press this key again, it will hide the inventory. So now we have an action, we need to add some logic to it, so it will display the inventory. For the IMC default, I can close that because that's all we need to do. I will finally go into the third person folder again, go into blueprints, and open the BP third person blueprint. In the third person character blueprint, I can now look for a node, which will be IA inventory. And the idea is, as I mentioned, every time I press the I key on my keyboard, the key I assigned to the action, I will open the inventory, which will display the widget we created. And if I want to close this inventory widget, I can just simply press the same key again. To do that, there's a node called flip-flop that does exactly this. The flip-flop nodes interact between two outputs, like A and B. So every time I press I, this will display the first behavior of the A pin here, and if I press it again, it will go into the B behavior. So this is exactly what we need. We press I to show the inventory and press it again to close the inventory. To display this inventory, we need a reference to it, so I'm going to create a new variable here, which I will call BP inventory. I'm going to change the type from boolean to WB inventory, and I want an object reference here. I'm going to drag and drop the BP inventory variable we created here. I'm going to get it, and from there I want to set its visibility to being visible. So the first node A would be connected to that, setting visibility to true. In that case, by default it's visible, which is what we want. And from B, what I would need to do would be the same thing, so I could drag and drop BP inventory, get BP inventory, set visibility. In that case I want it to be hidden, so that would be A to set it to visible and B to set it to hidden. However, this will not be enough, because we have a variable BP inventory, we are making visible and hidden, but our reference is not mentioning anything. You can see that our default value of BP inventory is empty. This means that we need to check if our reference to our inventory is valid or not. To do that, I'm going to drag and drop the BP inventory again. I'm going to click on get, and once I have this node, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to convert that to a validated get. This will allow me to check if this reference is valid or not. If this is valid, then something is attributed to the reference, to the variable, and if it's not, it means that the BP inventory is empty. And by default, it is empty. So first, if it is valid, if our reference is actually working, then we can go directly into setting this visibility to true. But if it's not valid, or in other words, this is the very first time I'm pressing the I key on the keyboard to open the inventory in the game, it will not be valid. So if it's not valid, then I need to create this widget and to create this reference. To do that, I will get a player controller, And from the player controller, I will look for create widget. Can move that up. So if our reference to the BP inventory is not valid, well, once again, this is the very first time I'm playing in the game and opening the inventory, the default value is none, so this is not valid, then I will create the widget for the inventory. In that case, for the class, I just simply need to get WB inventory. We are creating the widget now. And now, because it is being created, I can set the BP inventory variable, drag and drop, and then set BP inventory, connect those two together, and I can get the return value of the create the inventory widget into this blueprint widget. From there, I can also go into add to viewport. So now I can add to the viewport this inventory user widget we created. And actually what I just thought about is I'm going to rename this variable BP inventory to widget inventory. Just going to compile. So this name change should make things a bit more clearer and to avoid confusion with the BP inventory and the BPC inventory we have from the previous video. Now that we have the visibility being set, and also if this is the first time we can create this widget, one thing I like to do here is to get a set input node. In this case, I want to get the set input mode to game and UI and connect the first set visibility we have and this add to viewport directly into this node. For the player controller, I'm simply going to get player controller here. This allows us to enter the UI mode when we press I for the first time, which will display the inventory, but also allows us to get into UI mode besides being on game mode. This makes it easier to interact with the UI now. And one thing I like to do is from there, from the player controller, I also want to get the show mouse cursor variable. I want to actually choose set show mouse cursor. Here we go. And I want to make that to true. So when we press the I key, we display the inventory, and this will also show us the mouse cursor. On the other hand, if I'm pressing the I key while the inventory is open, I don't need to be into the UI mode anymore. So I'm going to look for set input to game only. Can connect those two together. Here I just need once again a reference to the player controller. Get player controller. And from the get player controller, I also want to remove the mouse cursor. So set mouse cursor to false. Can compile and save. So all we're doing here is we press I for the first time. If this is the very first time we're pressing I, then our reference to the inventory widget is not working. So we're creating this reference to be used later on during the game. And by creating this reference, we also want to display the inventory because we press the I key. If I already created this, if this is not the first time I'm pressing the I key in the game mode, then our reference is valid and we go directly into setting the visibility of the widget. We are displaying the widget to the user. And on the other hand, if I am showing the inventory widget because I press the I key, I want to exit this widget, I want to go back into the game, I can press I again to close the inventory. So now if I go into my game and press I, we can see that we have the inventory being displayed here. So this is the widget we created. And of course there is no item in our inventory yet, but also we are not displaying those items at the moment. And if I press I again, this removes the inventory and I can walk around. So just before we create the actual logic to display all the items in the inventory, I need to make a small point about the set input game mode and UI. When we do that, this doesn't mean that the player controller will stop moving. This only makes sure that we are accessing the UI inside the game. So if you want your character to not move, you need to add some extra logic, but this is beyond the purpose of this tutorial. If I go back into my WB inventory, we have this designer, but we can also access the graph here to actually code some logic. I'm going to remove all the base functions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom event. So I'm going to look for custom event. So add custom event. And I will name this custom event create inventory. From there, this event will take one input, which will be called inventory. And actually I'm gonna rename that create inventory UI. So it takes one input, which is an inventory, and this type will be struct item, what we created in the previous video. And if you remember from the previous video, we want to make sure this is an array of items and not just a single item. And from there, I will look for a for each loop. The array of this loop will be the array of items in the inventory. And for every item in the inventory, I will create a widget. And in that case, I'm going to create a item slot widget. So for every item in the inventory, I want to display the name of this item and the quantity of items we have. And as I mentioned in the very beginning of this video, we have created this WB item slot widget, that displays the name and the quantity of items we have. And this is all it does. And all of that is used in a vertical box to display all the items in a vertical way inside the inventory. So back into the graph of WB inventory, I am creating as many item slot widgets as we have items in our inventory. In that case, I also need to get a player controller. So for all the items we have, we create an item slot. I can create those item slots, but I need to make sure that they're not randomly spawned somewhere. They need to be children of this vertical box. So I'm gonna go into the vertical box, call that list item, and I'm gonna make it a variable. Back into the graph, if I compile that, we can see that we have list items now here as a variable. So I'm gonna get it. And from there, I will look for a function called addChild. And I will connect that to the create item slot widget. So my list of items will add a child every time for every item we have, which will be an item slot. So the target is the list item, and the content is simply the child we are creating, or in other words, the item slot. Once we have that, from the array element of the for each loop, I'm going to look for a function called breakStructItem. This will give us all the variables inside the structure items we created. So what I want to do here is for every item we have, I want to display the name inside the item slot. Exactly what I have here. Instead of saying text block, I want the item name here to display the actual name of the item. So from the item slot we created, I'm going to drag the pin and look for item name and get item name. So this item name is a reference to this text block that we named item name. It is a variable, so we can access it in different functions, in different blueprints. In that case, this is what I'm doing here. And I want to set the text. I want to set the text of this text block to whatever the name of the item is. So I can drag the name here from the breakStructItem into the text of the setText function. Automatically, Unreal will convert the string directly into a text value. I'm going to connect those two pins together. I will compile. I will save. So this function creates an inventory UI that will display all the names of every item inside the inventory. However, this function right now is working, but it's not connected to anything. So I simply need to go back into the BP third person character. And from there, I'm going to get my widget inventory again. And now that we have a function called create inventory UI, we can access this function here. And I can create this. So I'm simply going to connect that to the logic from before that displays the UI. We can see that we need one argument called inventory. In that case, we simply get our BPC inventory from last video. So get BPC inventory, from there get inventory, and we simply connect that to the pin. You can save now. So now every time I'm pressing I, not only does it show the inventory widget, but it also shows all the items automatically. So I'm going to close, go into my game mode. I'm pressing I, we can see that nothing is happening except showing that our inventory is here. Since it's empty, there is nothing else. If I interact with objects here, I got a shield, and in here I got a sword. If I'm pressing I again, I should see in my inventory one shield and one sword. And we can see here, we have shield and sword. And on the right side, we have a text block because I did not define any quantity, but the logic will be the same, and we'll talk about that in the next video. This is it for this video. We saw how to create the UI for an inventory system and how to display every item directly into this UI. In the next video, we'll see how to update this inventory when we get multiple items of the same type. So this is it for now, and I will see you in the next video.